Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Myles. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about a question again that I get a lot from people, and really a concern more so, and it's what if I can't find a buyer for a deal that I get under contract? And I've found that a lot of times people are afraid to get into wholesaling real estate because they're like, okay, I get it. I get a deal under contract with a seller, and then I find a buyer. I take those contracts to a closing attorney or title company, depending on what state you're. Some states are attorney states, some states are title company states when it comes to closing transactions. And what if, though, I can't find that buyer and I'm under contract with the seller? Like, what do I do? So I just wanted to talk about really some steps to take when you are wholesaling and you have a contract with the seller, and some things to think about. So first of all, when you are under contract with a seller, there is what's called a due diligence period that you should have in your contract, a due diligence period. And it sounds like what it sounds like. It's a period where you are doing due diligence to really confirm that the numbers that you and the seller agreed to actually make sense for the purchase. So it's not that you just you go under contract with the seller and then you have to just buy the property and you're going to get sued. And I mean, just whether you actually find out later that there's a huge foundational issue, or, you know, there's water damage that you didn't see, or the seller didn't bring up to you, you know, at the first conversation you guys had, or whatever the case may be, there is a period that allows you to go do your due diligence to not only dig deeper into the property, but really what the due diligence period is really for as a buyer. So if you're wholesaling, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll get the property under contract, and within that due diligence period, that is the time when you'll go find the buyer. But if you're an actual buyer yourself, so I can sharing this with you guys so you really understand why there is a due diligence period in the first place. Because the due diligence period wasn't designed for wholesalers or wholesaling, but what that period was really for is, you know, let's say I'm talking to a seller and, you know, I'm asking the seller about the condition of the property, and you know, they're telling me that, you know, the HVAC needs to be replaced, or, you know, you got to replace some windows, and, you know, the floors are in good condition, but this and that, or whatever. I'm kind of taking the seller's word for what they're saying about what they feel like the condition is of the property. But when I go to walk the property, because I'm an actual buyer or an investor, I might actually see and notice that there's some issues that the seller either didn't notice, or that just the seller didn't say, that can really change and affect the numbers on what I could purchase the property for. On top of that, though, even if the seller was absolutely correct about every single thing that was going on in that property, you still want to have a due diligence period, because there are some things a seller just does not know, because they're maybe not an electrician, or they're not a plumber, or even just wanting to get bids on how much these things are going to cost. So the seller, again, might be completely correct with what it is that's going on with the property, and then you kind of estimate your numbers based on what you think that rehab budget's going to be. But then you go with your GC or a contractor, go walk the property, and when they calculate what it's going to cost, you're like, ooh, actually this is like way over what I actually estimated. I need to go back to the seller and I need to figure this out a little bit. So just kind of throwing that out there. Really, the due diligence period was designed for a buyer, someone actually buying the property, giving them a period of being able to do more due diligence within that period. And if they find that there's some kind of finding that just really alters their numbers and their approach to be able to buy the property, they are able to withdraw, get out of that deal, or at least go back to the seller and renegotiate. But their earnest money, which is what I'll talk about in a second, their earnest money is able to be refunded. And, you know, it's not like they have to go buy the property and they're going to get, you know, a lawsuit because they didn't, or whatever the case may be, right? So let's talk about earnest money. So when you have a due diligence period, so let's go back to number one, you find a seller that's interested in selling their property. You guys are talking about the condition of the property. You feel like the numbers make sense, and you go under contract with the seller. There's generally what's called EMD, Earnest Money Deposit, EMD. And what that EMD is, it's somewhat of like good faith. Like, you know, hey, I'm gonna put $5,000 up, in the sense that if I don't close this transaction, I will lose that $5,000 or that $3,000 or whatever it may be, 2,500 bucks. And that's something that's negotiable, obviously, between you and the seller. Generally, everyone does it different. Some people do 1% of the purchase price as EMD. Some people just do a flat rate. I generally just do a flat 500 bucks. And if they ask for more, then I'll, you know, talk to them about, okay, I'm willing to go up to this or that. But I just generally do $500. Because look, if I can just put $500 up earnest money, because you just never know, there's all kinds of situations that might happen where you really actually have to just lose that earnest money. And I'm not going to dive into all, and it's not necessarily even at your fault. There's just things where it's like, look, you know what, here, fine, just take the earnest money. Just certain situations that may occur, you know, only having $500 on the line rather than 5,000 or 3,000 can obviously be helpful. But you might have a seller that wants a little bit more earnest money because to them, it's like a security. They're thinking, okay, the more earnest money you put down, you're really going to move forward with this transaction, which is what that earnest money is for. Now, again, this is what scares most people going into wholesaling is that earnest money, and then the fact that, you know, they're like, well, what if I don't actually find a buyer in general and I'm under contract legally? What do I do, right? So again, going back to when you go under contract with the seller, you're going to have this earnest money that you'll take to the closing attorney or title company. You know, sometimes the seller will, you know, they'll verify and check. So just make sure you have funds available for that earnest money. Or what you can do is you can reach out to someone like myself where I will actually help you and fund your earnest money. So if you need $500, if you need $1,000, if you need $2,000, reach out to me, and I actually have a company where we actually will help you fund your earnest money, obviously for a fee, but it's helpful if you literally have no access to funds, and let's say you're about to make a $20,000 assignment, but you don't have the $1,000 or $2,000 for the earnest money. Doesn't it make sense to have someone fund that earnest money for you so you can make a huge chunk of that, obviously, right? So it's definitely very helpful. But anyway, so you have that earnest money at the closing attorney or title company. Now you have opened up escrow, which is what that means. You've opened escrow, but then you have the due diligence period. Now, how long should that due diligence period be? Again, this is all kind of negotiable, but I generally like to do 14 business days. If I can do up to 30 days, absolutely amazing. Most sellers won't do 30 days because it kind of ties their property up for 30 days because you could essentially, on the 29th day, withdraw and you get your earnest money refunded. You get your earnest money back. So most sellers won't want to do that. But 14 days is a good kind of period. I mean, a lot of times you might find 7 days is what they're wanting. But if you can really push to that 14 business days, then that will really give you a larger amount of time to be able to not only run numbers, to do your due diligence, to get bids on how much things are going to cost, but if you're wholesaling, to even basically find buyers within that period. And the reason you want to say 14 business days in the contract is because think about it, you know, Saturday, Sunday, these aren't business days generally, obviously, right? But they are days. So if you just say 14 days, then it will count weekends. So I like to say business days because then it extends a little bit longer because we don't count, you know, Saturday, Sunday, like in the weekends. So that's what that due diligence period is there for, guys. You put that due diligence period in the agreement, and that gives you time to be able to go find buyers for your deal, or if you're buying the deal yourself, to do enough due diligence to make sure that whatever you agreed to or had a conversation with the seller, you know, when you go walk the property, you don't find things that totally alter what you originally expected to pay. Now, here's something I'll say. Wholesalers have definitely kind of created a little bit of a bad rep for themselves because what would happen is, you know, wholesalers that were really doing the business the wrong way, they didn't know how to underwrite deals and they were just locking up people's properties to just basically take advantage of that due diligence period. So I'll just lock it up even though I didn't really do the work to make sure it's at a good price so it can move. I'm just gonna lock it up and just see if I can find a buyer. You don't really wanna do that. Number one, you're tying up these sellers' properties, and these are their properties, their homes, they own these properties. You don't want to just go tie up their property just to go see if you can find a buyer. I wouldn't go about it that way. I tell my students, you really should only go under contract for 2 reasons. If you are absolutely looking to buy this deal, like you are planning to buy this deal, you have funding, you have a plan, you're wanting to buy this deal, then of course go under contract. Or number 2, you absolutely know you have a buyer for this deal, or you are like 99.999% confident that you'll have a buyer for this deal because you've done your numbers and it's a really, really solid deal. If it's not a deal that's that amazing, then you don't want to go under contract because you don't want to just have their property tied up and then you're going to go look for a buyer for that property. So these are a couple of things that I generally like to do is when I first got started, what I would do is work backwards. So I would find the buyer first and then figure out what they are interested in. So buyers have certain criteria on what they're looking to buy. Like myself, there's certain areas I like to buy real estate in. There's certain types of real estate. So build relationships with the buyers, figure out what it is that they're interested in, and then go look for exactly what they're looking for. Because now you're not worried about just tying up someone's property with a due diligence period. Now you have a property that actually is under contract, but you already are like 50% of the way, because you basically found a property that a buyer was already interested in. So that will really help you with not necessarily going under contract on a property and then hopefully you find a buyer for that deal. You want to work backwards. Build relationships with the buyers, figure out what it is that they want, and then go find those properties and then bring that opportunity to them. And that's going to be a much more effective way of basically wholesaling the real estate deal. So again, guys, don't be concerned and so worried about, oh my gosh, what if I get this thing under contract and then I can't find a buyer? Again, I just gave you an example of how you can build a relationship with the buyer first, find what they're looking for. So now you're not hoping that you find a buyer, but then secondly, make sure you just have that due diligence period in that agreement that has 14 business days. And if you need earnest money, EMD, reach out to me and we will help you and fund your earnest money so that you can actually get this deal done. But anyway, guys, hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions about that, just reach out to me. Would love to help, and see you guys in the next video.